Since the end of the Cold War, we've sold more military weapons than the rest of the world combined.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
My name is Jack Shanahan, Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired. One of our nuclear bombs blows up Hiroshima 15 times over. 5 devastates Russia. After that, this is how many the U.S. has left. I feel safe reducing nuclear weapons. Do you?
Hey, by the way, if you thought that was interesting about what I said about how they passed the first banker bailout bill, think about this. A little while back, I got to interview Edwin Vieira. Now, here's a gentleman who has taken cases as an attorney, okay, and litigated them all the way to the Supreme Court, and won 3 out of 4 times. He's a constitutional scholar. Listen to what he says about how we were ripped off and how the Senate gutted a bill, sent it back to the House after they put in all their banker bailout stuff in it. Let me ask you another one, constitutionally based, and that is when they first did the bailout plan, notice they did it on the weekend, and then that failed. When I say failed, Congress turned it down, and thumbs up for Congress for having a little bit of, chutzpah or whatever. And then the Senate then created or rewrote it and then pushed it back to the Congress. Am I wrong in understanding that the Constitution says all the legislative powers are held in the House?
All spending bills must originate in the House, because the House, of course, is that branch of Congress is closest to the people, right? Because originally, the senators were elected by the state legislatures.
Right.
Okay. So they wanted spending. Taxation without representation was one of the problems that led the war to pass. They wanted spending determined by the representatives closest to the people. What happened in this particular case was the Senate took a bill dealing with something else entirely. They deleted all of the substance of that bill. All they used was the number, and they made it into a spending bill. And they claimed, well, because that bill that they had originally used came out of the House, that therefore they weren't limited by the constitutional requirement. And of course, that's simply an obvious subterfuge.
It's like bait and switch.
Absolutely.
I was wondering, because once again, when I heard that the House had turned it down, and then later on, it's like another weekend, they're threatening us with depression and all that, which was created, when I say created by them, by a lot of the decisions that they made, let alone that central bank. And then they come back and say, well, the Senate has turned around and put it back upon the House. I couldn't figure out legally how they could do that.
Well, they couldn't, but the reality is the courts are probably not going to look at that. They don't want to get themselves involved in the internal intricacies of political manipulation in Congress. But you can see the reason. Congress had turned this down, the House had turned it down. It was pretty unlikely that the House was going to bring up another bill on the same subject. Therefore, they needed the end run, and they had the people in the Senate who were willing to play this game. And then the House, instead of turning around and saying, which they should have, wait a minute, you're playing a game on us, this is a subterfuge, we in the House are going to reject this on the constitutional principle. What did the House do? Turned around and rolled over for them.
You bet, and and 57 of them are somewhat changed their vote from what they were.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was. I found it very interesting when it looked at the money that was spent into campaigns by the bankers to those individuals who changed their vote compared to the ones who maintained their vote. Rather interesting stuff.
Well, it's kind of to be expected.
Oh God.
Right?
Anything we subsidize, we shall control.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got it.
Once again, the bankers are getting thousands of dollars. You're not even getting pennies. Oh, and by the way, you got to pay for it all. Oh, and you got to borrow the money from a private bank where you have to pay interest. And then they're going to give it to banks so that they can do what? Loan you money at interest. Are you figuring this out yet? Is any of it coming, making sense? Oh, and that's right, you have your criminals in government, You've got your new, Democratic Party criminals as far as presidential government, but all your other criminals in the district of criminals, what are they doing? They don't pay their taxes, but you have to. A guy comes to your door with a gun if you don't pay. If they don't pay, what happens? They usually get promotions. So anyway, we're going to roll right along now because this new administration, we have a new Attorney General Holder who has written, for the Supreme Court cases. Remember the Heller case on the Second Amendment? Now remember, do slaves get to carry weapons? Last time you read your history books, go through all your history books. This country was founded because they were going to take the weapons, the means of defense of the colonists from Lexington and Concord, right? You remember that? Let's see, Hitler took their weapons. Yeah, that's right. For all you Sharon viewers, you know what he was like, or at least when you talk to your relatives, you'll find out. And then you've got Stalin, back was Lenin first, but he took all the weapons too, right? And then starved the people and admitted it. Talk about Holocaust. 40 million enough for you Holocaust counters? Yeah, that's what Lenin and Stalin were good for, actually in excess of that. But first they had to get the people's weapons. Then there was Mao. He did your Cultural Revolution. Yeah, how did Mao do it? Mao took their weapons. And when I say weapons, it's not just the fact that you have weapons. It's a free man's ability to defend himself, let alone his property and his family, or her property and her family. So what I have for you, a couple things, and that is that one is, do slaves get to have means of defense, or do they want slaves to be helpless, you know, to where they can't fight back, and they just have to be that slave? So I wanted you to consider, I was listening to a person who had interviewed a 99-year-old German man who'd lived through both of the wars in Germany, in the last century. Remember, that's how the bankers make money. The Rothschilds and stuff, they make money on wars. They fund both sides. Everybody needs bullets. Everybody needs uniforms, guns, tanks, right? And they usually don't have the money. But what this gentleman said, and I thought was rather interesting, and they asked him, well, did you see the Nazi thing coming? And he said, yeah, we saw it coming, but before that they had made so many slight, small law changes that by the time they woke up, there were so many laws that they couldn't do anything. Are we living through those same similar times where our freedom of speech is being taken away, free speech zones, but nobody's standing up? What happens when good men do nothing? That all of a sudden we're going to have, you watch, all this new anti-gun legislation. Where are the good men going to be when that happens? Okay? When we're the Fourth Amendment, illegal wiretapping, search and seizure, show us your papers, sobriety checkpoints, putting the military on our streets. Are these little changes, very small, all because of what? All because of a lie, a false flag terrorism event we know as 9/11, where there was a loss of life, but they never really had the evidence to pin it on the people, what, a guy in a cave? In my dreams, guys in caves can't make NORAD stand down. Guys in caves can't make buildings collapse into their footprint. Sorry, especially when buildings that weren't even hit by planes. Please look at Building 7. Maybe we can show them real briefly. Free fall speed in its own footprint, not struck by a plane. Rather interesting, huh? So anyway, we've got here's a little bit of Second Amendment for you. I have this clip, and this is a gal, this is Suzanna Hupp. She was a representative in the Texas legislature for 10 years, 9 to 10 years, and she's also a doctor. And she has a sad story, but she has a very important story for you people out there who may at some point want to defend yourselves and or your loved ones. So please give her a little bit of ear, let her speak, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. We'll talk about the Gun Owners of America, two good things. So here you go. Here's Suzanna Hupp in her words. So that hits it for about 7. All right, we'll come back with, boy, now here's a gal, a doctor, a representative, someone who knows, and she told those people she was giving testimony to what it really meant and what the Founding Fathers meant, and I actually agree with her. You may not. You may think that everything's okay and you need someone to hold your hand and big brother, but what you don't understand is when tyranny comes knocking on your door, let me give you a better knock. When tyranny knocks on your door, it's going to be in a uniform and it's going to have a gun. That's just the way it is through history. When criminals get into power, bad things happen in governments. And when we've been lied to constantly, remember no secret prisons? Remember no torture? Remember we're not wiretapping everybody's phone? Remember weapons of mass destruction? Do you remember all those things? When you're lied to constantly by your banker-manipulated media, your globalist-manipulated media, and very slowly, very subtly, they make changes. These are slow changes, very subtle. We want reasonable gun control. We want the fairness doctrine so we can control what people can hear, see, and read. Yeah, and already we have 6 corporations, 6, control 95% of what you see and what you hear. and what you read.